So going back to my story of Jane Doe, AP clerk, she's probably authorized to do 3 things. But if I have admin access, I'm authorized to do anything. So we focus a lot on authentication and keeping folks out of the network and out of the business applications and challenge them with multi-factor and other things, which is extremely important. But then we lose sight of, are we going through and making sure that all the accounts, all the identities we have out there are only provisioned or set up to have the minimum level access for their role? Because ultimately what those accounts or identities authorized to do impacts or controls the damage they can do, if you will, from a fraud perspective. Yet if they're not authorized to do much, guess what? They're not going to do much damage. Now,
hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our interview with Frank Vukovits. Frank is a CISA, CIA, and Chief Security Scientist at Delinia, which is a pioneer in security identities through centralized authorization. But before that, we knew Frank as a Chief Evangelist at FastPass. And Frank will talk with us about merger with FastPass and Delinia. But let's welcome to our show Frank today. So my pleasure to speak to you again, Frank.
Oh, thank you, Boris. Always great to be on your show. I'm looking forward to our conversation. I'm sure it'll be another great one.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. We had a few conversations with you in the past, and I think last one was about access certifications. But today we will discuss more concept of identity GRC. But before we start, maybe could you remind us about your career path and a little bit about your what you guys at Delinia and before that and FastPass up to the date?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So I've been in the space a long time. I've been a certified internal auditor, certified information systems auditor, as you mentioned, for 30 plus years. Started way back when in IT audit for GTE, which is now Verizon, and then did CIO work, and then did a lot of work then, even before I joined FastPath, in just the security audit and compliance space. At FastPath, before we got acquired, I was there for 8 plus years. And working a lot with our partners and our customers and helping them with the FastPath solutions, figure out how to add the controls that FastPath provides into their business applications that are natively missing or very manual. And I'm just by nature an audit type. ITGCs get me excited. Talking about compliance, regardless of regulation, gets me excited. And I like to share my knowledge. And my role at Delinia now as Chief Security Scientist, it's still a lot of evangelist like I did before. In fact, I'm at the Black Hat USA 2024 conference as we speak today, talking to a bunch of folks in the cybersecurity space and seeing what the latest trends are there. And at the end of the day, Delinia acquired FastPath to build out their portfolio. Delinia has been around for a while in the cybersecurity space, really helping protect from those external threats. And as we've talked about in our previous show, Boris, you got to balance the external and the internal threats. FastPath, really good with business applications, GRC around those applications, and those are your internal threats. So we were required by Delinia for many reasons, but one of them is to broaden their portfolio to help you truly have true enterprise security, as we've talked about before, to mitigate the external and internal threats. So bad guys and gals on the outside trying to break into your networks, Delinia is great at that. And now with the acquisition of FastPath, you can talk about your internal business users and mitigating those threats as well. Some are which intentional. We know some people are fraudsters out there and know they are over-provisioned access. They're going to do bad things. Others, it might be occupational fraud and they're just over-provisioned and accidentally click a few buttons and something bad happens. So regardless, from a Delinia perspective now, we talk a lot about securing identities at every interaction. And identities can be a business application user. And interaction can be a transaction inside any ERP system, going back to the FastPath business application thing. So it all fits together nicely.
Yeah, fantastic. So you now both combine evangelical part of your career now with scientific. So it's a very unique combination.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is, my friend. Yeah.
So let's dive into the concept of identity GRC. Can you explain what it entails and why it's becoming increasingly important for organizations today?
Absolutely. So there's a lot of for a marketplace for a while now. There's been providers, IAM and IAG providers that are basically folks that are providing a solution to compliant user provisioning. I want to set up new users into my network. I want to set up new users into my applications. The concept IGA, or Identity Lifecycle Management. We hear about join, move, leave. Someone joins the organization. We need to set them up with a bunch of different accounts to a bunch of different applications or resources. They then switch jobs or move, and we want to then take away access from their old, what they required for their old job, and give them access to what they require for the new job or role. And then when they leave the organization, that we just cut off all their access. So that concept's been around for a long time. We in the audit space, we call that compliant user provisioning, setting up new users to business applications. And as you move throughout the organization, hopefully you're turning off the access you needed for your old role and just add in new access for your new role. That doesn't always happen. That's why some of these IGA solutions came to be. What's been missing, though, in that space for a while is really not just looking at the role, but when we assign you the access, is it causing any conflicts from a segregation or separation of duties perspective, and doing some granular level risk analysis. And what I've seen, and we've seen at FastPath now at Delinia, an evolution where the marketplace is really saying it's more than join, move, leave. When I provision a user through the identity lifecycle, I want to check and make sure the impact of that user and what roles and entitlements they have. Is there any conflicts? Is there any risk I'm introducing into my business application, introducing into my network, introducing into my infrastructure, introducing into my cloud infrastructure? Let's check for that before we provision. So again, the auditor me would tell you what's compliant user provisioning. You should check for SD conflicts before you provision access. But a lot of the providers out there had not been doing that. They'd been assuming that if, and I love to use this example, let's say we're setting someone up with access to SAP, and it's in SAP, this is a new hire, they're an AP clerk. Let's say her name's Jane Doe. And we're just going to go out in our IGA solution with the identity lifecycle, and we're going to pick SAP and say, she's an AP clerk. And we're just going to allow whatever access that AP clerk role and the set of entitlements with it and SAP provides, we're going to assume that's correct. Well, guess what? What do we know from being in the audit space for a long time and working SOD across the board? Auditors know this. The software publishers, your SAPs, your Oracles, your NetSuites, your Microsoft Dynamics, and then even outside of ERP, your Workdays, your Salesforces, they develop a lot of roles that you can assign to users, but they don't check from an SOD perspective what all that might be introducing risk-wise. So the concept of Identity GRC is to let's check for the risk we're introducing as a part of this provisioning process. Again, provision equal join, move, leave, equal identity lifecycle management in the IGA IM space. And let's check for that first, because guess what? It's a preventative control, and we love preventative controls, because then what we're doing is we're shortening up the exposure or the risk to the organization. We're doing it right the first time, lowering the risk to begin with. We still need detective controls, which is the traditional GRC, right? Where we're reviewing who has access to our systems, what are they doing with that access, what data are they changing, all that's, and we're running reports and looking at that, and that's all great, and it's needed. But those are all detective. But if we can do some preventative work up front too, now we're really in the cybersecurity space. We talk about the blast radius. I'm wording this at Delinea, that if someone does take over an account, whether it's out on the network, whether it's out in the cloud, in your business application, what type of damage can they do? Well, if we're provisioning them and checking for risk before we provision and making sure that what we provision them access to is just the minimum they require for their job, which what's that? Least privilege access, right? Auditor's been talking about that forever. Now we can really take that blast radius and make it really small. So if their account is compromised, their identity, or in this case, their user in a business application, the damage they can do is less. So that's the concept of Identity GRC. Let's just not provision identities. And again, identity can be anything. It can be a human or it can be a machine. In fact, there's lots of studies now out there that there's 40 to 50 times more machine identities than there is human identities. We love to talk in the GRC space about people and mitigating those risks, right, in business applications. But then there's all these other, with APIs and all these interconnected machines now, you need to manage those those identities too. But let's minimize provision, just what those identities need, and let's do that risk analysis there. And then we can have a additional level of confidence when it comes to the risk across the organization and balancing out what those folks have access to, those identities have access to. And then when we talk about the interactions or what they can transact, what they can do with that resource, what they're authorized to do. And authorization is the key to this. We're really limiting the scope of what they can do with that authorization to minimize the damage if something fraudulent were to occur.
Mhm. Oh, fantastic. So because many companies focus heavily on authentication as their
Yes.
primary
Yeah.
security, but
Yeah.
what can you explain why is it crucial for organization to
Yeah.
understand the authentication alone is not
Yes.
enough? Maybe we have to do
Yes.
about authorization play, which is
It
very
it is
pivotal.
it is not enough. But I'm speaking downstairs at 11 o'clock today,
Ah,
exactly on that topic about authorization and authentication and why authentication is not enough. Because guess what? And multi-factor is great, and there's other ways now to authenticate the advanced technologies there. But if somehow I'm able to spoof who you are and still authenticate, and even with zero trust, when I'm trusting the hacker once they get in, the damage they're going to do is not because they've authenticated. It's the account they now have authenticated to. What are they authorized to do? So I could take over an account, but it's only authorized to do three things. If I'm a hacker, I can probably move on to a different account. Now, where the game changes is, of course, the bad guys and gals, they want to take over the accounts with elevated privileges, right? The admin accounts, the super user accounts, the whatever the term might be for the resource you're talking about. Well, most commonly called admin, but it could be in a business application, it could be a super user or global admin, whatever the term's used, the keys to the castle, if you will. Certainly want to protect those even additionally with concepts like privileged access, privileged account management and the like. But bottom line is it's the authorization that determines what someone can do. And guess what? Even elevated privileges or admin access is, if you break it down, it's just additional levels of authorization, right? So
mhm.
going back to my story of Jane Doe, AP clerk, she's probably authorized to do three things. But if I have admin access, I'm authorized to do anything. So we focus a lot on authentication and keeping folks out of the network and out of the business applications and challenge them with multi-factor and other things, which is extremely important. But then we lose sight of, are we going through and making sure that all the accounts, all the identities we have out there are only provisioned or set up to have the minimum level access for their role? Because ultimately what those accounts or identities authorized to do impacts or controls the damage they can do, if you will, from a fraud perspective. That if they're not authorized to do much, guess what? They're not going to do much damage. Now, if they're authorized to do a whole lot of stuff, that's where the problem comes. So I think we have to balance it. We got to have authentication up front, but then we have to make sure authorization is set up and monitored. And again, this is where it gets frustrating. As you know, in business applications, a lot of times a new hire starts and we say, oh, they're starting an account and give them the same access as Jane Doe. Well, what if Jane Doe has been at the company 15 years and she's moved into three different roles? And her latest role is AP clerk, like we talked about, but we never took away the access, what she was authorized to do in her previous roles. So
Mhm.
now we're introducing someone else into the company, giving them access the same as Jane Doe, and they have access to a whole lot more than they're supposed to. Access meaning they're authorized to do things. So authorization, in my mind, is really the key. It cuts across every resource you have. And if you think of identities as users on the business application side, it fits. If you think about machine identities and the infrastructure side of things, not even people, it makes sense. We want to control what those identities can do, and what they can do is authorization.
Oh, fantastic. So we discussed principles of least privilege access, securing elevated privilege accounts, and
Yep.
also the role of authorization in security. So what were you guys working on now? Maybe you can discuss with us some future trends and
Yep.
in access control and identity
Yep.
management. So
Yep.
what
Yep.
advancement do you foresee in the
Absolutely.
field?
Absolutely. So been around this space a long time. Uh, I remember the days from an audit perspective where it took a week to get reports generated by the IT department just to allow me to go audit who has access to what. And they'd go into the mainframe and they'd have to run some security reports and they hand them to me. And I'd go through my pen and my highlighter and start tying things out to the HR system output. Who's our employees and what's their title? Uh, we've come a long way since then, Boris, and a lot of automated tools to help with not just audit testing, but to help manage access and help manage identities. And a lot of great technologies around authorization and authentication. But now this big thing called AI is out there, right? And we love to use AI where applicable. And I was at the Gardner Security Risk Summit in DC back in June, the US one. And they talked about where AI is at. from a security perspective and where it's going. And really, they thought later in 2025 or 2026, companies really start to see true value in their use of AI versus what they've invested in the expected outcomes versus what they're getting. I think where it's really exciting where this is going is, let's talk about signals. I log on to a network, and there's technology already do this today from authentication perspective. I want to look at the signals coming with that login. The second I hit enter, if you will, or click on the mouse, recording things like my IP address, time of night, what location I'm coming from, what resource am I trying to access. Throwing that into some big model that says, wait a second, that's not normal for Frank to be logging in at midnight, logging in from Europe at midnight and trying to access this resource that he hasn't accessed in 3 months. Well, the power of AI now is allowing us to munch through, go analyze all that data very quickly. And we go back and put our audit hats on. We talk about preventative controls and detective controls. What if I can use AI now, and this is the authentication front, to stop that login up front and say, you know what, I see 3 things that look like anomalies. I'm going to stop that log on. I'm going to put another challenge in place for Frank to truly show who he is. Maybe it's another multi-factor. Maybe it's some other type of challenge, whatever it might be. But using AI to take all those little pieces of data, throw it in this big bucket, look for anomalies, and then take that anomaly and make that a control to say stop. So authorization-wise, there's companies out there doing that today, including Microsoft. So that helps with authentication and helps protect, again, making sure the right people are getting logged on and zero trust. But let's look at the other direction, which I talked about earlier, how authorization is so important. What if we can do something there with authorization in AI? What if I'm getting ready to post a journal in an Oracle Cloud from an ERP perspective, and I click on the button, okay, or I hit enter? What if we can take that information, really quickly gather that, all the details around that journal? Okay, it was Frank trying to post that journal at this time and day from this location inside this system, and go analyze that and say, wait a second, is Frank might be authorized to transact at that point in time, but is this something he normally does? And put a stop to that before the actual transaction goes through. Now we're really cooking with gas when it comes to authorization. So we're actually double checking, if you will, activities, interactions that are taking place from authorization perspective. And again, the power of AI, the ability to look at so much data in a format that you can build patterns, anomalies, and natural language, all that good AI stuff, allows us to have this ability. So I think what you're going to see, and even in that scenario, let's say the timing doesn't work. Maybe you capture data after I click OK or enter. You look at it, and then you identify 5 seconds later, oh, this looks weird. Can we backtrack it? Can we shut it off? Can we stop it? There's some question about the timing of that. Can we really do that all up front before the transaction hits, or do we have to identify right after? And folks will solve that. Bottom line is, it provides us a really unique way to take a simple concept like authorization. And it used to be, okay, what are they authorized to do? Do we do least privileged access? Do we review their access occasionally? Looks good, looks good, looks good. Well, now we're getting more into preventive controls around authorization. That's really cool stuff. And I think certainly in the business application space, very excited about it from the work I've done over the years at FastPath and just as an auditor. But thinking more broadly in the just entire ecosystem of applications in the cloud. You think about the machine identities, all the resources out there that are authorized to do certain things, interactions, if you will. Boy, if we can really figure out a way to proactively double check what they're doing before it actually enacts the activity with the resource, that's extremely powerful. And especially from a BizApps perspective, a GRC perspective, you talk about shutting down fraudulent transactions quickly. That's awesome stuff.
All right. Fantastic, Frank. We discussed a lot of things today for the concept of identity GRC, difference between different kinds of accounts, authentication, authorization. Maybe to summarize before you go to your lecture today for the Red Hat event, and we should summarize two major kind of takeaways for 1 or 2 major takeaways for our listeners, so they will have something to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I've talked about 1 or 2 of these before, but first, from a business application perspective, so your SAPs, your Oracles, your NetSuites, Microsoft Dynamics, Workday, Zora, Coupa, Salesforce, what have you. I still feel like the ownership of security, in a lot of cases, relies on the business owner of those applications. So let's say the CFO owns the ERP system. And us as auditors want to make sure companies are mitigating all those internal threats around their business applications, because we know that the studies from the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners and like to talk about how much fraud takes place in companies, how much is it internal, how much is it tied to internal controls. I think companies need to think more broadly and get out of these silos of security around their business applications and plug those groups into the overall direction that the CISOs and CIOs of the organizations are driving security-wise for their company or for their enterprise. Unfortunately, a lot of those CISOs and CIOs are focused on the external threats. And as we talked about before, I'm still selling this story, this true enterprise security story, Boris, that you have to mitigate your external threats and your internal threats. And you have to get the executives all on board, get your CFO and your CISO and your CEO talking to say, you know what, we're in this together. We all want to keep our company secure and financially prudent. What we need to do then is make sure everyone understands what each other is doing security-wise. What frameworks, what guidelines are you following, CISO or CIO? Do you know that your CFOs, when they set up security in their organization for your ERP, is following the same guidelines? I think we have to break down these silos that still exist with business application securities being owned by the business owners with little or no input or understanding from the CISOs or CIOs, because they're focused so much on external security. That's number one. And then number two, I think we still have to remind folks that, you know what, in the best intentions, you can still have gaps, and fraud can still happen. It's what happens when that fraud happens, and what have you done to mitigate the damage? Least privilege access, zero trust. Try to have more preventive controls with compliant user provision, like some things we talked about. No company is going to be perfect. Every company has risk, and we can't remediate risk intimately because we have unlimited resources. And I would argue, even if we had unlimited resources, you don't want to control everything to the nth degree, because that's not the right use of resources. But let's try to put on our hats across the enterprise and think about what are we doing to protect ourselves if something bad is to happen. And concepts like least privilege access and compliant user provision, when we're doing risk analysis before we give someone access from a join, move, leave perspective. And then still have the preventive controls. I think that's critical. I'm learning a lot about that in the cybersecurity space in this blast radius concept, Boris. I draw a lot of correlations to least privilege access in the business application space with GRC that you and I live in. To think, let's not over provision users. I mean, 80% of your business application users are probably over provisioned and never using that access. Let's remove it. How many users, if you remove their access, call you back, say, you took away my access? Not normally. So let's provision people correctly up front. Let's do the risk analysis up front, and let's get all our executives on the same page when it comes to approaching security. And that's from my perspective, the secret to true enterprise security, and Identity GRC fits in very nicely with that approach.
All right, awesome. So, thank you very much, Frank, for this great interview, and we hope to cooperate with you guys in Delinia as long as we cooperated
Absolutely.
with guys in the FastPass. So
Yep.
I wish you a great success in today's event. Look forward to speaking to seeing you again on our platform.
Always a good, my friend. Enjoyed the time as always, and have a good rest of the week.
Thank you. Bye bye.